Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our workshop that we've talked about for some time now on tenure. We have hopefully arranged for this evening a good educational discussion on the concept of tenure. The whole idea of this discussion and workshop is to help the trustees understand tenure. I can tell you from our own evaluation, as you look at the word tenure and you look it up in the newspaper, or excuse me, the dictionary, depending on which dictionary it is, there are definitions all over the map. And when you start looking at tenure policies of other institutions, you find that tenure policies vary dramatically depending upon the institution. We are here tonight to talk about NIC's tenure policy. We're not here to talk about any other tenure policies of other institutions because, quite frankly, we haven't had an opportunity to review them and compare them, and it would be an unfair discussion if we had discussion from one person about what they thought the policy was at a different university without all of us having, or institution without all of us having the opportunity to review it. The structure for our discussion tonight will proceed along the following lines. We have invited 3 members of the faculty and 3 members of the community at large to make presentations on the concept of tenure as they understand it, or from what their belief of it is. It is my hope that everybody who is engaged in the conversation tonight has taken the opportunity to review the relevant tenure policies here on NIC's tenure policy. The sequence of our discussion tonight hopefully will go as follows. What I'm going to do is ask a member of the public to make a statement or a comment, and then we'll have a member of the faculty make a statement or a comment, again restricting their comments to the concept of tenure and what tenure contains and how it performs, or if there are difficulties with tenure as practiced here on NIC's campus, what those difficulties are. And then we'll alternate the presenters between the members of the community and members of the faculty until we're finished with those. At the conclusion of each presentation, which would be 6 or 7 minutes, the board will be asked if they have any questions of the presenters so they can follow up on comments that were made. Again, this is in an endeavor to try and get as much information as possible. This should be a collegial discussion, a discussion where we look for the reason and the merit and the issues surrounding tenure. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the presentation for the community members. We had, as members of the community who had been contacted about presenting here, we have Jeffrey Smith, Jim Tippett, and Ron Reed. Now, from the faculty, we have, or on behalf of the faculty, we have Norm Gissel, Molly Mashad, and Karen Ruppel. Unfortunately, Jim Tippett and Ron Reed were not able to make it tonight. So what I'm going to do is start out with comments that were sent to both myself and Ron Nilsson from Jim Tippett, and then I'm going to ask Norm Gissel to make comments after I complete reading this statement. First, let me tell you, this is a statement that came off my cell phone. I did not talk to Jim directly. He was traveling. He said, "Hey, Ken, Jim Tippett returning your call. I let Ron know here that I was not going to be able to make it. I actually ended up on a trip back east, and I'm not going to be able to make it, but I can and will submit my thoughts via email if you would like them. If not, let me know. But I would also like to visit with you about exactly how tenure is structured at the college. I don't have a problem per se with tenure, as long as it's earned and the tenure is actually maintained. In other words, that they actually have to do something to earn and or keep the tenure. You can't just relax and stop doing your job and doing it well just because you have tenure. That's what my concern is. You pay people more and expect more of them, and you should get that. Anyway, give me a shout if you get a chance. I'll be in meetings off and on the rest of the day. And like I said, I'm traveling next week. I'll try and be available for a phone call. Then he submitted this by email to Ron. Ken Howard, thank you for the opportunity to give you my position on tenure. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend Tuesday's evening meeting. Please extend my apologies to the group. Please read the following. Below are my thoughts, questions, and concerns related to tenure. Over the years, number one, over the years, what percentage of NIC tenure applications have not been accepted? If it is an extremely high percentage of acceptance, I am concerned that tenure is granted and not necessarily earned. In other words, it's a right, not a privilege. Number two, how many tenured faculty have lost their tenure over the years? If the answer is an extremely low percentage, I am again concerned tenure is a right and not a privilege. Number three, if a faculty member with tenure is underperforming, how hard is it for them to lose tenure? If it is truly protecting them, I have concerns. Number four, it appears that NIC trustees have the final say in granting tenure. I assume they have the same in removing tenure. If that's true, great. If faculty truly has these decisions in their hands, I am concerned because those that are granting and removing tenure are the same as the tenured employees. Please understand I have not had the opportunity to read the requirements to earn tenure at NIC, how the selection process works, how hard it is to maintain tenure, what the answers are to my questions, and finally, how hard it is to remove a tenured employee. However, after reading about the subject in general and assuming NIC has similar policies to others, I have the following thoughts. I do not believe tenure is the best solution to maintain and grow academic excellence. I believe that in general it is too hard to dismiss a tenured employee who is not performing or has violated employer policies. I also don't believe that tenure motivates all those that achieve it. While some may be motivated, others may have quite the opposite reaction. As a customer, someone who hires your students, I don't want the motivation to go away for any of your employees. Find great employees, find out what makes them great, and encourage that behavior with proper rewards. It seems that tenured faculty around the USA seem to be worried about losing tenure. If they are doing their jobs, why should they be concerned? Personally, I would like to understand more about the process to earn tenure at NIC because you may have proper checks and balances in place with your tenure policy to put my concerns at ease. Now that's the completion of Jim Tippett's submission. And I had mentioned that I would have Norm Gissel make the first remarks on behalf of the faculty, but it could be that one of the other faculty members, either Molly Machad or Karen Ruppel, would like to respond following those comments. Anybody?
Well, what Molly and I are going to present might answer some of those questions.
Why don't you start then, Karen? Do you mind?
Actually, I'll start.
Molly?
She's the first piece, I'm the second.
Okay. All right.
Good evening. I'm Molly Machad, and I was selected to present on behalf of my faculty. I'm a Coeur d'Alene girl. I'm an alum of NIC, and I'm newly tenured. You may remember my addressing your board, and thanks for that in March. Although I am representing my faculty, I'm not unusual or atypical. So everything that I exemplify tonight, you can rest assured I represent the masses.
Molly, could you pull that microphone up a little closer to you? There you go.
Okay, so this evening I will be explaining how the process of tenure conferral works and what that looks like over the 4-year probationary period. Karen Ruppel will then explain the policies and procedures that govern tenure, and Norm Gissel will then speak about the community's expectations and the understanding that tenure signifies. What tenure does is it establishes institutional commitment and accountability from the faculty to the institution. It defines quality teaching and a process to measure that quality teaching. The hiring process itself ensures mastery of the content area. The tenure process ensures mastery of teaching through a process of mentorship and evaluation. Each of us has between 25 and 75 learners in a single classroom. Each one of those learners has different life skills, different life issues, and different learning styles. Learning is complicated, teaching is very complicated as well. After 4 years of mentorship with continual follow-up evaluation, tenure then is a certification or a stamp of approval. It is what marks us as master teachers. The faculty commit to ongoing professional development and evaluation through this tenure process. Faculty are also committed to the processes of the institution, including advising and committee work. Coming from the corporate world, my experiences as a marketing executive never entailed such rigorous scrutiny from my colleagues, my managers, or my clients, as in this case tenure process has. Our tradition of excellence is what sets us apart from the post-secondary competition like the Phoenixes, the ITTs, and others. Our shared commitment to excellence is why we can differentiate ourselves. It's why this college attracts business executives, retired military officers, lawyers with Juris Doctorates as full-time tenured faculty. It's why our students can rely on the most cost-effective education their dollar can buy, and it's why our community trusts and depends on our contribution. High-quality faculty serve as one of the cornerstones of this great institution, and that is guaranteed via the tenure process. This is the result of the tenure process. This is what tenure looks like. Over 4 years, we are evaluated, self-evaluated, and reflective on what we bring to the college. Once we are hired with a tenure track position, the first job is to find a faculty evaluation team, and that is the responsibility of the tenure candidate. I had to cajole Fran Barr, who was in my division, and I was able to recruit Audrey Bourne, who was outside of my division. This faculty evaluation team nominations went to the tenure committee for approval. They did approve my committee, thankfully, and then I had to schedule in-class observations with the 2 members of my faculty evaluation team and my division chair. They had to observe my teaching 1 time each semester. So in a 75-minute class, that's 3 hours a year. I was observed by 3 people. 9 hours, is that, I'm English, so forgive my math. I then began my self-evaluation and using the tenure policy as my outline. I had to document and articulate how I met the following criteria. Was I an effective teacher in the classroom in terms of my curriculum design, in terms of meeting course outcomes and the college mission? Also, most importantly, in terms of student success. Did I have adequate academic preparation? In terms of advances in my discipline, I had to keep up with that. In terms of changing outcomes, those are updated continually. And in terms of my teaching practices. I also had to be dependable in terms of meeting contractual obligations. Teaching priority is number 1, but I have to contribute to my college community with committee work. Personally, I served as my division's lead faculty advisor, working closely with advising services, providing my chair and division with advising directives, innovations, and advising processes. I attended advising conference with the student services and became a member of the National Advising Association. I served and still do as an alternate and subcommittee member of the Student Learning and Outcomes Committee. I work with Ginger Winkler and have for several years to develop and create the English faculty facilitator position including responsibilities, workflow, and deliverables for accreditation for our dual credit program. I continue to work with several teachers in area high schools, from St. Mary's to Bonners Ferry, in training, overseeing, and directing the English composition and literature classes. I performed these tasks throughout my probationary candidacy. I also had to meet with each member of my faculty evaluation team and my division chair each semester to review my classroom observations. I was also evaluated by each student in each class every semester for a total of at least 120 individual evaluations each semester. These provided me with examples to make time to conference individually with my students more often. I also learned to provide more examples of papers that I wanted to see from them. We discussed my strengths, my weaknesses, my student evaluations, and my own self-evaluation. These members also helped me to create professional goals and provided directions in terms of teaching challenges. I had to prove to the college that I will continue professional growth. In terms of continued coursework, I've taken 17 postgraduate credits and professional association memberships, the national advising one I just mentioned, and I am also a member of NACEP, the Dual Credit Accreditation Association. I was also able to work in Boise with the State Board of Education to create placement scores for reading and writing. Finally, I have to prove an adherence to the professional code of conduct. I need to prove that I am a credit to my college community and that I am a trustworthy, skillful, and master teacher. Since conferral of tenure, since I saw you in March, I will continually be evaluated every 3 years to maintain the measure of excellence. I will continue with ongoing professional development, and I will continue to serve my college. For example, last summer I served on the ORS 2 committee and worked at ORS 2 sessions, several night sessions last fall semester. Last summer, I served on the Early Alert Committee to identify and redirect at-risk students to increase retention and completion rates. I also continue to work with dual credit. I created a 2-day workshop and trained teachers with curriculum, outcomes, grading, practices, etc. Those tasks I did during the summer outside of my contractual hours. I continue to serve and receive training with the Students of Concern Committee. I work with Joe Jacoby in the drama department. And I'm not atypical, like I'm saying. I just represent a slice of what our great faculty do here. As I hope you can see, this process isn't capricious, it isn't a given, and it serves as a quality assurance this college requires for continued accreditation in terms of our commitment to teaching excellence. And I just have to tell you, after receiving tenure last spring, I was very excited. I told my friend about it, and he said, "Molly, that is so awesome. What is your bonus?" And I said, "Well, that's the thing. I just have the status of tenure. At this college, it is not tied to monetary gain. In fact, we didn't receive a step last year, so there wasn't a bonus." But that's what tenure is. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions, Molly? And thank you very much for that presentation, Molly.
Yeah, and you can.
No, hang on. There might be some questions. Okay, thank you.
Proud of that.
Thank you. Any of the board have any questions of Molly? Molly, let me ask you, when we look in the policy for tenure, under 3.02.09.
Would you read that for me? I don't know.
Yeah, I will read it for you, so that everybody has it.
What page are you, Ken?
There's no page numbers on here. Page 205, under 3.0209. It says, tenure is defined as a reasonable right to continued employment except for the following: termination of employment for cause as defined by the termination of tenured faculty policy, termination of employment as defined by the applicable NIC reduction in force policy, or release of tenure by virtue of voluntary retirement, resignation, or abandonment. Those, the Tenure for cause then has its own list of things. Primary above them, or among them, is cause is defined under 3.02.32. Cause is defined as any conduct that may damage or may be detrimental to the college, its students, faculty, employees, as determined by the Vice President of Instruction. Examples include, but are not limited to, criminality, dishonesty, unprofessional or unethical conduct, violation of policies, abandonment of responsibilities or inability to perform the essential functions of the position, or a failure to satisfactorily complete the remediation process if there was one. That sounds like a pretty stringent policy, not just to attain tenure, but also all of the obligations that you have in order to keep it.
Maintenance is huge.
Would you tell me, from your perspective, and I know this, you're newly tenured, do you believe that faculty members as well as yourself review these policies from time to time to be reminded of these obligations?
We do. Absolutely, we do. We in faculty assembly, we look at them. In fact, we're updating all of our policies right now. So we have subcommittees that keep an eye on these things. They keep us informed. We're not all combing through the policy books all the time, but we share what we find and make sure that we're all aware.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Molly.
Welcome, thank you.
You know, one of the things I forgot to announce that I wanted to do at the beginning, because I think it's helpful, is to have Mark Lyons. I had asked him to give us a brief statement on the concept of from an employment law standpoint of the two different kinds of employment conditions, and that would be contracts and employment at will. And Mark, would you do that for us, please, and how it ties into tenure?
Sure. Just as a real quick overview of employment law, and that's kind of how I look at these issues. We have generally at-will employment and what people refer to as contractual employment. Many people have a sense of what at-will means. It generally means employment can be terminated for any reason, but there are exceptions to that in the law. Contractual employment usually means employment for a term and with limitations on the reasons that an employee can be discharged. It's often a requirement to be discharged that there be cause. Many private employers, and I've been involved in a number of lawsuits that involve private employers as well as public and institution employers. But many private employers have a policy, it's typically in an employee manual, that limits the termination of employment to situations where there is good cause, and that's often defined, and it's defined often very similar to what's in the termination of tenured faculty policy. So what we're talking about in this workshop is tenure and what it means at North Idaho College, and I wanted to look at this and compare it to how you would look at this from an employment law situation. So aside from the important aspects of the tenure as it relates to recognition of academic excellence and effective teaching, tenure at NIC is really, from my perspective as a lawyer, looking at this from an employment law situation, it's more like contractual employment. Tenured instructors can have their employment terminated for cause. Cause can include what Chairman Howard just referenced: dishonesty, unprofessional, unethical conduct, violation of policies, a failure to perform the essential functions of your job, or failure to complete a remediation plan. And if you look at the remediation policy, that's a policy that is designed to assist and correct performance if performance is found to be deficient after evaluations. Very similar to private employment situation. So I think one of the things to take away from this, from an employment law perspective, tenure as a concept can be different at different institutions. And while it's rumored to be a guarantee of lifetime employment, you have to look at the institution or the business, whatever it is you're looking at, and see how that institution defines, in this case, employment, tenure, and as tenure applies to employment. So simply put, at NIC, when you read the policies, tenure does not guarantee continued employment. NIC tenure looks, from an employment law standpoint, it looks more like contractual employment in the private sector. So I think that's important because people have different ideas as to what tenure means, and if you look at it just from the legalistic standpoint of what is the risk to the institution from employees bringing wrongful termination suits, it's not that much different than the risks to any private employer that has an employee manual that limits the reasons for termination.
Thank you, Mark. So going back to our formula here, if we will, I'm going to invite Jeffrey Smith to make the next presentation. And Jeff, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the board and to the audience, and just give us a couple of some understanding about your background, and please give us your comments. I know you've had an opportunity to read a number of the policies and procedures. So,
my name is Jeffrey Smith. I'm an employee of Edward Jones Investments here in Coeur d'Alene. Have been a partner with Edward Jones for about 17 years. I think I was asked to come. I'll try and get this right. Asked to come tonight and speak on tenure. And I thought when I was initially asked, am I getting better and closer at this?
that's good.
Okay. When I was initially asked, one of the things that first came to my mind was just the fact simply that I'm not an expert in education. That's not my background. It's not what I know. But I do know a couple of things, and I think many of us in the country, and I know we're trying to be specific, and we're trying to talk about policies here at NIC, and I do believe it's important we do, but if you'll allow me a little bit of leeway. I think when I think of education, and I talk to my peers, my business associates, and certainly educators I know, I have come from a family who have educators that served, and so the first thing I think I want to share to an extent is that I have tremendous respect for educators and the job that each of them do in our community and certainly across the country. But truly there are some issues when we think about education today that most of us, certainly as Americans, as Idahoans, and as those of us here in North Idaho, recognize that in many ways we're failing. We're not doing the job. And so as I thought about this, I thought to myself, well, does tenure help in our mission, or does it hurt our mission to educate young people and to make young people and older people, those of us who are looking for different career opportunities or looking to extend our education, does it help us at this community college level here at NIC to make productive citizens that have the ability to enjoy, I guess, the fruits that our nation is? And as I looked at it, I thought first and foremost, I have a bias. And my bias is that when I think of tenure, what I often think of is the fact that it is probably, as Mark was stating earlier, this guaranteed job for life that once achieved, you can do anything and not be reprimanded, not be terminated. As I've done a little bit of research on that, I found that that certainly isn't the case everywhere. I don't believe that that's the case here at NIC. And I'm always, when I think about my biases, something that my father always told me is that for the most part, our biases are a product of our environment and the people we spend time with. And then certainly if we don't question our biases, our assumptions, and our assertions on a regular basis, someone else is going to do it for us. And with that being said, I took the next step and had the opportunity to look at what tenure means here at NIC. And I apologize, but I sure feel like I'm cutting in and out. Am I doing that? I'm not. Good. Am I too loud?
You're doing fine. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So in looking at the policies here at NIC, there are a number of things that when I look at tenure, and in particular, there are some things that raise a few questions. And when I think gaining tenure in that 4th year, and as Molly so well put, that process of earning tenure is when I look at the FET process, I guess I question who is choosing who those FET persons are. Is that?
The candidate chooses them and sends it to the tenure.
Okay. So that's a question. And then you did answer a question for me that it wasn't a choice of a teacher choosing 1 or 2 or 3 students. All of those students evaluate you, whether they are tremendous students that you have a great relationship with or whether they're maybe not such great students. And so that clarifies something in my mind as well, and that being that maybe an educator or a teacher has the opportunity to hand pick these people that give them the greatest leg up at the opportunity, okay? And that's not what's happening. So I look at it, and then I kind of go through the suspension policy, and then the 3.02-31. One thing that struck out at me as well is the long process that when someone is, I don't want to say accused of wrongdoing, but that's certainly what comes to my mind, is in that process where a teacher has been found to have a lapse in judgment or an error, the first part of that is a 90-day suspension with pay. That doesn't happen often in the private sector. And so that's something that as I look at policy and procedures maybe needs to be addressed. And that with pay can go on, or the potential for back pay from what I understand in this contract goes on for 9 months and sometimes could go on for more depending upon the situation. So I look at that and question that as well. The termination process, as I look at that, it just seems like certainly a very, very lengthy, time-consuming process that once a decision's made that an employee is going to be terminated for whatever reason, that process of continually coming back between the VPI and the president of the institution and then ultimately to the board and back and forth is a process that, you know, somehow, from my perspective, again, looks as though that could be honed down. Or certainly looked at. Maybe from a legal standpoint, that's not possible. But I think more than anything else, what I give thought to when I think about teachers and educators today is I think that you're all under such tremendous pressure. And the thought when the average non-educator has when they think of tenure is so very, very negative on your perception or on your profession. When I went out over the last couple of weeks after being asked to speak to this and did a little research on my own, talked to a number of people, a number of educators, a number of retired educators, people that were in administrations, ex-superintendents, people all over the country for that matter, the vast majority of people have this picture of what tenure is, and it's really, really negative. So I don't know how we address that. Certainly on a national level, that's not for us to do. But I do think that maybe there's a way that we can at least change this perception here in Kootenai County with North Idaho College. My suggestion, I guess, if you're willing to listen as a board, and certainly those of you who are teachers here at NIC, is to consider the fact that maybe you establish some type of an ad hoc committee to look at the issue of tenure, not with the thought process of terminating it or doing away with it or disbanding it, but with the thought process of maybe looking at some of these issues to I guess, hone this down a little bit, make it a little bit more manageable for lay people to get out there and understand, but then take the time to share that message with people in the community.
That conclude your comments?
That concludes my comments.
Jeffrey, thank you very, very much. There may be questions from the board members. Any questions? Well, I have got a question. I'm not going to let you sit down.
You're not, Ken?
No. We had an opportunity to talk in your office here a couple of days ago and talked about tenure a little bit. And I guess I'd like to ask you, and because we talked about this a little bit, your company has a probationary period, I take it, before they hire people in, right?
Yes.
And after they're hired in, there's an employment policy that they have to abide by?
Correct.
And can a supervisor just fire an employee?
No, it's a process. I've managed a number of people over the years with my firm, and there is a lengthy process we have to go through as well. And I think, that's part of the issue I look at tenure as a whole. And again, I'm going to be very general here for a moment. When I think of tenure nationally, I mean, in part what I think is that we're providing extra protections for people when current employment law really does the job of protecting them as it does for the rest of us. But when I look specifically at the policies here at NIC, what I feel is that there's I don't even necessarily want to say a workable solution, but there are a number of things in there with a limited amount of time that I had an opportunity to look at that makes me believe that certainly to get the general public thinking more positively about tenure here in Kootenai County with North Idaho College, that there is a way to get a group of people together to study the issue, maybe make some adjustments. As I look at all of those policies, looks like the last update of any significance is about 4.5, almost 5 years old now. And I don't know how often that has been looked at in the past, but...
That's not only a good suggestion, it's something that we're in the middle of right now.
Okay.
Evaluating all of our policies, quite frankly, not just the tenure policy. But just to sort of conclude my question, I suspect if an employee doesn't like the result of his going through the personnel file, they can appeal it, I suspect, within the company to a certain level?
Really, there isn't a necessary, there's a couple of different things that are in, at least with my firm, that your employment is based on. And certainly one is performance. We're in the financial services industry. But performance is related in a lot of different ways. We're measured not only by the income that a particular office generates or an individual generates, but certainly as well by, we have something that is called CEI, and it's ultimately, are our clients happy with us? And we're graded on 9 different levels as to whether we explain fees properly. Are we taking the time to understand their concerns properly? And so there is an appeal process for what I would call support personnel. If you're working with, in particular, an advisor, and that advisor has 2 or 3 support personnel that are working under them, there's an annual evaluation that those folks have to go through. But then ultimately, if they don't like that, they can make an appeal. They do a self-evaluation as well, as Molly spoke of. So there is a process.
I mean, quite honestly, it sounds like your company has tenure.
I kind of got the impression you were going there, Ken.
Right, yes.
Chairman Howard.
Jeff, he's an attorney, he always goes
Oh,
there.
I understand that.
Might be another question here.
Yes.
First off, Jeff, thank you for the research that you've done on this topic. You've obviously spent some time. Appreciate you taking that out of your busy schedule. As you've had the opportunity to discuss this topic with various individuals, you kind of gave us a bit of an inkling of the different folks that you talk with, current educators, retired educators, some folks in senior administration, in school district superintendents, that sort of thing. One of the things
Just had a conversation with the CEO in Singapore about 45 minutes ago, maybe an hour. Everyone has an opinion on tenure.
Interesting. I bet it was quite varied. But one of the things I want to touch on is you made a comment that one of the common threads through those conversations was a negative opinion or thought process in regard to tenure. And I guess I'm curious to explore that just a little bit more, because one of the things I'm curious about is, especially from the educator side, if there was any distinction made of the various uses of the term tenure, because it can have many different meanings. And in the context of the traditional meaning, it was originally designed for research at research colleges, never intended at the junior college level or certainly for CTE, professional technical So I'm wondering, did anybody discuss that distinction or kind of the origin of it to where it's kind of morphed to at this point?
I did have a number of discussions on that. My understanding is tenure really came about, if you go back to 1887, for example, when the NEA first got started in Chicago. Employment law as a whole was really taking root there all across the country, unionization of a variety of industries. And so that is where tenure, I think, first got its seed, so to speak. In talking with different people, and I really asked this question to, I think 32 people was the number. There were some variations from the standpoint, Todd, of how people felt about tenure at the K through 12 level as compared to community college, as compared to university, as compared to research university. And so there is a varying opinion as to where it's most appropriate. I personally go back to the fact that okay, maybe tenure has its purpose. I'm not certain it has its purpose here at NIC. I must say that listening to Molly for a couple of minutes and the process that she went through and actually reading the procedures and the policies, it seems to me to be fairly rigorous and may very well be fair. I haven't and don't feel comfortable at this point saying, well, I have the full body of knowledge to say tenure is a wonderful thing at NIC. But I also can't sit here or stand here and stand up before you tonight and tell you that it's a horrible thing and it should be abolished and done away with. I think further study certainly is in order. And again, to put some citizens at large on a group and to consider getting some educators there, or maybe an employment law specialist, and a group of people together to take a look at the policy if it's important to you as a board to address it.
Yes, Ron?
First of all, Jeff, thank you for coming forward, and I think that as you put it so eloquently, is that tenure is a misunderstood word, and that being the only community college in the state of Idaho with the term tenure in there, and we got a chance to meet with some of the other community colleges, and they defined their employment contract and tenure almost on top of each other, just almost a different word. And as Molly spoke about the hoops that they went through, quite an education came from that. And I think that we said to the faculty when we started this discussion 4 months ago, this is grossly misunderstood, that everybody polarizes on the term tenure, and that we said we were never here to try to eliminate tenure. We just wanted to be able to understand and be able to define it how it fits for our community college. And that when it gets emotional like this, all of a sudden everybody stands back. But you stood in front of us saying, as you went forward and you saw and became educated, you found out that it wasn't something that was evil, it was something that was important to this institution is here. And when I look at our company, we're an at-will employer, but we spend a lot of time when we hire people say, no, there's a due process. The difference is at-will, you fire them for no reason, and a due process means there's a process that says you don't terminate good employees. Turn that around the other way is tenure. It doesn't necessarily mean lifelong employment, but there is some places that you hear these horror stories across the country that say they have rubber rooms. I remember seeing something on the rubber rooms, and if you go look up tenure, it does that. So I just want to tell you thank you, and I think that you're a walking testimony what happens if we get together and drop our emotions down and we come to some clear understanding, and eventually we walk away saying, if tenure is going to be applied, it's being applied right here at North Idaho College. So thank you for your time.
You bet. Thanks.
Any other questions? Jeff? Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming down. Yes. Okay, Karen, did you want to go next?
Sure. I'd like to start by telling you that I broke my glasses today. And I thought it was really funny. I told Molly, now I look like, kind of a fuddly professor. My name's Karen Ruppel, and I am a tenured faculty member at North Idaho College. I've been here for 17 years, and 14 of those as a full-time faculty member. I'm going to discuss a few things, policies, but I would like to respond to Trustee Banducci on CTE, because I am a PTE, CTE, whichever you prefer, faculty member. And so my response is whether or not it's important to CTE, and I do understand that we have, at the state level, policies for CTE programs that supersede our local policies. And so therefore, you know, if program reduction or something like that were to happen, those policies would stand at the state level. But when I came to North Idaho College as a professional technical faculty member, most of us, the bulk of us, although I'm probably one of the exceptions, do not come with an education background. We come from industry, and we're usually really experienced industry professionals with no idea how to teach in a classroom. And so we might be good at training, we might be good at, you know, telling people how to do a task, that sort of thing, hands-on, but we do not necessarily know how to teach. We do not necessarily know how to evaluate a student well. And the tenure process is so valuable for that reason, maybe for a PTE faculty member with all industry experience more than the academic faculty member, because it's this process and this mentoring that we go through where we're working with colleagues that are experienced and we're working with colleagues outside our division and other divisions that gives us that training, however you want to refer to it, that education, that background that we need to evaluate students. So that was just a response to your question, and I hope it helps a little bit. I've always been a professional technical faculty member. I'm going to start, you've heard a lot of the policy talk a little bit already. I have more policy talk because that seems to be part of my job. I don't teach as much right now. I do student learning outcomes assessment on campus, and I'm also the accreditation liaison officer for the college. So part of my job is accountability or ensuring that the college meets its accreditation. And I have a little bit of slide up here, although it's not very pretty on the stretched out screen. But we are accredited by one of the 6 recognized accrediting bodies in the United States, recognized by the United States Department of Education. And that's part of the accountability process for this institution, as is tenure. Our college has to meet 125 standards when we're evaluated, and we are evaluated 3 times during a 7-year cycle, and then that cycle starts over. And the reason I bring that up is because 2 of those standards kind of embody what tenure is about. It really is the true meaning. One of those being, and I don't want to read the whole thing to you, some of it is up there, but it's a very lengthy standard. But I do want to read one piece of it. While the institution and individuals within the institution may hold to a particular personal, social, or religious philosophy, its constituencies are intellectually free to examine thought, reason, and perspectives of truth. That is the underpinning of tenure and why tenure originated. It's so that there is the free exchange of ideas in the classroom. Now, the due process, and that's what I'm going to speak to, I have policies that I'll bring up. The due process is what supports that freedom to exchange ideas, okay? Then the second standard I want to bring up, because this holds a faculty member accountable. The second standard states that individuals that have teaching responsibility will present their scholarship fairly, accurately, and objectively. Essentially, it says that our personal views and opinions have to be identified as such. We are not allowed to influence students with our personal beliefs. They have to be identified. And as we introduce ideas in the classroom, it needs to be supported, scholarly, and have fact behind it. Okay. So now I have another slide, and I have a fellow faculty member, Lori Olson-Horswell, to thank for this. But every business, I'm going to talk to this because many of you are business owners and many of the board members are business owners. Every business has a set of standards, and that set of standards are how we evaluate people that work within the business. And tenure is really simply the language of the industry of education. Okay, so it's, in a sense, it's the same as receiving an industry certification or promotion. So I have some examples here. We move from being an artisan to a master artist. We move from being an apprentice to a journeyman. We move from being an intern to a doctor, from a seaman to a petty officer to a command master, from a probationary faculty member to a tenured faculty member. It's a process of promotion, not attached to money. Okay, so tenure really promotes effective teaching. It allows for the freedom to introduce those multiple perspectives, and it ensures a process for hiring, evaluating, and if necessary, firing a faculty member. So Molly went through everything we go through to get to tenure. What I'm going to talk about is what we do, and this has been talked about a little bit, to tie all these policies together, how they're linked. In other words, hiring, remediation, ultimately suspension, termination, and in there we have a teaching focus policy on top of everything else that I'd like to speak to a little tiny bit. So faculty employment, NIC policy 3.02.08, the hiring process. The hiring process states that no faculty member, with the exception of a PTE faculty member that can be hired based upon industry experience, no faculty member may be granted tenure or tenure renewal without having earned from an accredited institution a master's degree in the subject matter area for which he/she has primary instructional responsibilities. So that's the first link or the first step in a really rigorous process. Then you might be asking, after we've gone through all of the process that Molly talked about, what happens if a faculty member fails to meet the tenure criteria? And that's where the remediation policy that Ken talked about, 3.02.30, applies. It applies in two ways. It applies to a faculty member going through the tenure process, and it also applies to an already tenured faculty member. It's another rigorous process, but it's a continuous improvement process. So in that 4-year period, if a faculty member fails to meet the criteria, they get help. They get a plan put in place. They work with mentors. They're re-evaluated by the deans, by the division chairs, by the vice president, and they get help in improving those processes. Then we come to suspension, which I won't go into heavily because it's a little bit different in that what this does is provides the institution the ability to immediately suspend a faculty member and investigate if the faculty member's conduct is found to be damaging or detrimental to the college. So this is to allow for an investigation process if a faculty member is found to have done something in violation of policy. And then faculty termination policy, this is kind of the ultimate. What happens if a faculty member, 1, undergoes remediation and does not meet the criteria of tenure, or 2, is suspended for inappropriate conduct, investigated, and found to be in violation of policy? This is when the termination policy then kicks in. It provides a procedure for termination, it protects the institution from wrongful termination case, and it protects the faculty member from wrongful termination. So it actually, serves dual purposes in my mind. So tying this all together, I've kind of put it up. We hire, it's rigorous, it's defined, and most importantly, it attracts and retains quality faculty. So if we remove tenure, we remove that ability to attract and retain quality. Then the tenure process, this is the process by which we ensure that accountability and maintain that quality. We have a teaching focus policy, if you can imagine that we have another policy, because we have quite a few, that further refines the process and focuses on teaching. And that one's very important because in all of this process through remediation, suspension, that one really, really focuses on what we should be doing in the classroom with our students. and that's our primary responsibility. And I have a couple quotes here. They don't show very well either, but we did a faculty survey, and I actually have the results of the survey to give to the board members. And believe me, it's not all good. I mean, there are people here at this institution, the bulk of us, that believe in tenure. There are other people that don't necessarily, even in the faculty ranks, value the process. So I only want to state in fairness that those show, all of those results are here. And then I think, finally, in conclusion, I want to say that tenure allows for the free exchange of intellectual ideas and varying perspectives. Tenure is a process of ongoing accountability and a process for improvement. It promotes teaching excellence and thus results in student success. It helps attract and retain qualified faculty. It does not guarantee lifetime employment, and it does not protect employment in all situations. That big binder that Molly picked up, that binder is a body of evidence, and that evidence can be used in two ways. That evidence can be used to help a faculty member along with continuous improvement and to support a faculty member if their ideas are challenged in the classroom. So if I introduce a concept and a student challenges me, that body of evidence is the merit of my teaching, and I'm judged on the merit of my teaching. I am not being judged because I introduced a concept that somebody disagrees with. And then that body of evidence serves a second purpose. If we have a faculty member in a situation where they maybe should not be teaching, they are not meeting contractual obligations, then that body of evidence can help the institution should they have to remediate or terminate. That's my argument for tenure. Any questions?
Anybody else? Do you have a question? Todd?
Actually, I have several, but I'll do a few and I'll let Ron go and then I'll ask a couple more. I'm going to give you three just to start out with that just jump out at me. You've opened so many different topics in your presentation. You are, actually. I had notes on several things. So you dovetailed very nicely into some of the questions that I was prepared for, so this is good.
That scares me.
Let me just give you three, because you're going to want to answer these probably as a group, because
Okay.
they align.
Sure.
All right. A couple things that you talked about was that the tenure process was valuable in the training that it provided, especially for the folks coming from industry that did not have formal education training as a secondary education or post-education major in their undergraduate or graduate degrees.
Sure.
As a sidebar, I'm a little concerned if we don't have our people really prepared before they're getting in the classroom to be able to handle the classroom, to do the grading, do the lesson preps and all the rest of that. So secondary issue. But the first question out of that would be then, is it not possible to have training to properly get our people prepared for the classroom without the tenure process? And because of that, I say that we're the only school with tenure for CTE or PTE that we know of. I mean, the other two junior colleges don't even entertain the word tenure for the academic and transfer programs. Certainly, they do not entertain it for the CTE or PTE. So how are they doing it? Clearly, somebody must be preparing those teachers to be in the classroom without the tenure process. So they must have some training in place or some sort of program or protocol. And then along with that line, you stressed academic freedom. But to be truthful, on the CTE and the PTE side, I think that's probably a secondary, if not tertiary, issue, because the reality of it is in that curriculum, you're teaching to a standard. There shouldn't be a whole lot of academic freedom. You're not going to talk about different ideologies and political spectrums and economic theories and stuff like that. You're teaching to a standard. You either weld it this way or you don't weld it this way, or you fix the engine this way or you don't. So I don't think that
I don't agree with that. I have to respectfully disagree with that entirely, in fact. And in fact, you're going through 3 lines of thinking here, so I would prefer to address one line of thinking at a time.
Hang on just
I
a
was
minute.
just about done.
If you could get a question.
Right. Well,
Oh,
or
there it
could
was.
you ask a
How do
question
you get
on
the
the
training
first
without
one?
tenure? How do you really
Please don't talk
justify
over
the
one another.
application of the academic freedom to the CTE in particular? And then how are these other schools doing it if they're not using the tenure track with the CTE folks to get the
All right,
training?
first of all, before you answer
Sure.
that, we've already discussed, we're not going to be talking about other schools and how other schools do things. We're looking at NIC's tenure policy, and with regard to that in mind, please respond to his questions and his comments if you would, Karen.
Sure. So go back to the first one on CTE, and you're asking about, training.
In lieu of
that
tenure,
in lieu of tenure. I would not argue with you that there would be plenty of ways of achieving the appropriate training. Most of that is done through coursework that the faculty member would take on in their own time. And I also would definitely dispute as far as, and I know you weren't alluding to any single faculty member or anything like that, but that we are hiring unprepared people. These people come into the classroom and they may not fully understand evaluation processes, neither do many of the academic faculty members who come in that are content specialists in their area. A professional technical or CTE faculty member is also a content specialist with many, many years of industry training in order to be able to step into a classroom and teach about that industry. And they are excellent trainers. They may not know all the ropes of teaching. That would be my response to that one. Let's see, what was the second piece of the CTE
Well,
one?
academic freedom, you took exception to that,
I took exception to it? What?
to my discussion of academic freedom.
Ask your question. Oh, whether a PTE faculty member
Teaching to
needs to be
standards.
protected. I'll use myself as an example because I teach an occupational relations class to my students. And so what we cover in that class, in addition to job search techniques and things like that, we also cover employment law. I regularly, in fact, I just did the whole unit on employment law with my students today. It was a 2-hour seminar, and I have nursing students and pharmacy technology students and the medical assistant students. And we spent 2 hours going over an extensive list, going through details, going through their responsibilities, rights, and remedies. We talk about sexual harassment. We talk about many topics that could be sensitive in the classroom. And then, in addition to that, a welding instructor or any other instructor is going to present and talk about work ethics, negotiation in the workplace, how to get along with other people. What do you do when you're confronted because you have a difference in beliefs? Hopefully they will, by the time they leave this college, know how to handle a difference in beliefs appropriately. So I think that a CTE faculty member, as much as any other, needs to be tenured. And your third question?
No, let's let Ron ask a question.
Okay,
How are you, Karen?
I'm fine, thanks.
All of this process that you took us through is all part of a screening process, and I understand that, that when you go through the hiring process, you screen through them and you find the right person, you hire them, and then the process of screening them for their tenure process takes place. The first 3 years are eligible, and in the 4th year they do that.
Correct.
And obviously that you guys are doing a good job of that because you can see by the size of the binder and that went through there. One of the things I would be interested in is that we know no matter how good you screen at the beginning and no matter how hard that you work, there's going to be some fallout. And so I think that would help us understand is this rigorous process we go through of screening, evaluation, and catching something that isn't working, that we would have people that went from the eligibility of tenure that did not receive tenure compared to those that did, and that those that were suspended for cause that were eventually terminated, we must have some statistical data that says that this process is working by the way we're doing that. Do we have that information available, Karen?
You know, I would have to defer probably to Lita for that.
Do you want to ask Lita that? I think she may be prepared to answer that. You can do that now.
I posed the question to Lita.
Do you want to see your list of questions?
I would like to be able to provide.
Yes.
Chairman Howard, and Trustee Nielsen. I would like to be able to provide you with some numbers. We have not systematically kept numbers related exactly to tenure and tenured folks. So I would, first of all, like to acknowledge my administrative assistant, Pam Coughlin, and Susie Dean from HR for working very hard on really manually pulling these numbers from our systems for me to be able to share with you tonight. So thank you, Pam, for that. So since 2003, I would tell you that we have hired 105 faculty into tenured track positions. Of those 105, 60 of them have achieved tenure at North Idaho College to this point. Important to note that we have 27 still in the pipeline of the tenure process. There was a question that I received about how many the committee recommended. So I'm going to kind of get all those questions out if I can at this particular time. So the committee actually had denied 3 tenure candidates in the last 10 years that they have received. But additionally, 1 year, 2 out of the 5 candidates they recommended for tenure, they also recommended that those 2 candidates be put on a remediation process so that they be looked at more carefully and given an opportunity to correct some deficiencies prior to going on. Of those 2 candidates, 1 was successful and 1 was not. Also in the past 10 years, there have been 3 candidates that administration has not approved for tenure, so has not recommended them to go to the Board of Trustees for conferral of tenure. I think what is also important to share with you, and it's hard to define in these numbers to really know how to portray the numbers in an accurate manner, but what I would tell you is over the 10 years, of the number hired, we had 15 who left the institution prior to receiving tenure. Of those, 18 left the institution prior to receiving tenure. Of those 18, 5 of them left because of other opportunities or by personal choice. 13 of them left as a result of unsuccessful completion of the tenure process. So somewhere during that probationary period or through being denied tenure or through the remediation process, 13 of them decided that NIC wasn't for them. So that was, if you do the math of 13 out of 105, that was a 12.3% of the total number hired actually left prior to receiving tenure. I was also asked the question about how many faculty have been terminated for cause who were tenured. In the past 10 years, I am aware of 1. Now, I think it's also important when you ask that question, and I unfortunately do not have the statistics for you, just because it's personnel, and I honestly did not know how to dig into that personnel without going through everybody who has left NIC, their individual files. But I, from personal experience as both Director and Dean of Health Professions and Nursing, know that this also occurs, that faculty, when they are identified as not meeting the standards of a tenured faculty member, whether it's performance, whether it's for ethical reasons, whether it's for lack of contribution to the college, or whether it's for not contributing to their professional development, are often counseled as a part of our annual evaluation process. So I would tell you that there have been a number of faculty over the past 10 years who have left NIC through a counseling effort or through an evaluation process that by choice they chose to leave the college rather than entering into a formal remediation process or entering into a termination process. And again, I can tell you that from personal experience of my role as a supervisor and manager of faculty, and I believe that I could probably find that anecdotally a little bit easier than I can find it factually because I would have to go through personnel files to find that at this point. We've not tracked that over the years.
Did that respond to your question, Ron?
Yeah, I think so. And Lita, if I remember right, because this is my first trip through the tenure process, so when you brought these binders in, it was quite a shock. And when you got through, I believe 2 this year were not, that were not offered tenure. Is that true?
That is correct.
So out of this, we're talking about, up until then, we have 3 total that were denied, and 2 of them were this year.
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at this saying is that what I saw in the process that you took through in the evaluation process and the time that we spent reviewing each one of those, it looked like the process was done very well. the people that received tenure deserved tenure, and the two that were there didn't get it. It seemed like a good sorting process. How long have you been doing this now?
I'm in my second year at the Vice President for Instruction.
Okay. Thank you.
Todd, you had another question?
I had a couple. One was just for clarification. On the student evaluations that occurred during the tenure process, and if I understood, it's every student in the section fills
Every
out the
student in every section of every class that you teach,
Does that continue throughout the teaching
every
process?
3 years. Every 3 years, the process is repeated during one semester. So after we're tenured, then every 3 years, we're evaluated by our division chair, we're evaluated by our peers, our 2 FET members, or other peers if they've been replaced or anything like that. And we select our class to be evaluated that semester, and we write a self-evaluation report.
You touched on the degree requirement, and I believe you used the term mandatory. And I guess I'm curious on that, because I'm trying to understand that I've heard different things on this, and heard the terms mandatory versus desired. How strict is that enforced, that the degree has to be that specific?
I think that it's fairly strict in most content areas, and there are, if I'm correct, and Lita, you can correct me, but there are some exceptions, but most often the exceptions occur when a faculty member is non-tenured. They're in a special appointment, or they're an adjunct faculty member, and then it's a decision that's made by the vice president and the deans and the division chairs. And so in some areas it would probably never be allowed, and then there are some content areas where we might have somebody that has a master's degree working toward a bachelor's degree working toward a master's. If they're going to be in the tenure process, though, then they have to achieve that master's level, except CTE faculty members that are judged differently based upon industry experience.
Another question, in my industry, and Jeff's also, we have a thing called continuing education. We do that in the insurance industry, we do that in the securities industry, where every year we take classes. We get ethics and law every year, we get various topics, some of those that are under scrutiny by the regulatory agencies. In that particular year, maybe it's variable annuities, who knows. What is your requirement for post-tenure conferment for continuing education in your field of specialty?
I think technically there would be no specific requirement beyond the fact that most faculty members want to, and second, it's how we move across the salary columns. And so as we acquire credit in continuing education, professional development, those are our methods for accumulating professional development units and making salary schedule moves. So we earn them.
This question is probably for Lita. As you were talking about the process and the procedures, requirements and process, when I look at our comprehensive evaluation report, I'm looking at the draft, and it went into the final, but this happened to be page 33 of 135. Lita, you talked about in 2008, we had a number of exceptions to how we hired some folks and how they went through the process, and that they didn't have formal interviews and they didn't do the teaching demonstrations. How many of our folks have we had since then? Because those are folks we just would have conferred tenure on just here in this past bit. Has that trend continued? Do we have any more folks that haven't been properly vetted through that process per our policies and procedures? Or was that a unique moment in time where we had several people that was the case?
Speaking to that 2008 hiring year, we had a number of faculty who had been hired in special appointment positions, which are full-time faculty positions, however, not considered tenure track. They had been in those positions, some of them as many as 5 years. Again, doing the work for the numbers I presented you today, I was reviewing those names, and I recall one faculty member that was hired in 2008 who had actually been hired as special appointment in 2003, so had 5 years of special appointment before they had been considered for full-time faculty track. Some of them as recent as the year prior, had applied for positions. So at some point in time, the faculty had been, taken through the formal hiring process, may have not been hired for full-time tenure track positions, but certainly had been reviewed for teaching special appointment positions at North Idaho College. So that what was unique to that particular year when the administration decided that we needed to, what they called it was roll over these special appointments to tenure track faculty, because we had them in special appointment positions for such long periods of time. Since that time, to my knowledge, and I've been in this position only 2 years now, so I can't speak to all of those years, I am not aware of situations or faculty who have been hired who have not gone through the process as has been described by our faculty today in terms of a hiring process and review, through the tenure process.
That concludes your questions?
Yes, sir.
Good. Karen, thank you very much. Oh, wait, Judy had a question, I think.
Thank you. We can multitask here. Okay. Thank you. All teachers do. Thinking through what you just described, probably more with Lita, the special appointment kinds of faculty, what I think I heard you say was then sometimes you have a special class or something where you need special teacher for a certain amount of time. What I also think of...
Was this for Lita or for Karen?
I'm not sure. So thank you. Thinking about the special appointment topic, it sounded like as you described it, there were some unusual circumstances. Generally, do we have very many special appointments that last very long before you get them into some more kind of evaluation process?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer, I would say yes. We actually
Come back.
we have a number of special appointment positions. It is a way that we are able to balance the full-time loads when we need full-time faculty to be able to advise students to take up some of the other workload that if we have too many adjunct faculty, it would unbalance the full-time faculty, and it would be very, very difficult. So I just want to pull out my numbers here again. To tell you that since 2003, according to my count, we have hired 34 people into special appointment positions. Again, those special appointment positions have lasted as low as 1 year and sometimes up to 5 or 6 years. So it varies just with the discipline how long we actually will keep somebody in a special appointment position. Some of those special appointment positions have ended after a year without further employment. Other special appointment positions have then eventually become tenure track positions.
And that's probably my question is, for quality control purposes, how long can someone teach here and not have some evaluation to be sure that they're doing well?
When you're a special appointment, you're evaluated under the same processes as a tenure track, and you have all of your students evaluate your classes, et cetera. The only difference is that you don't probably have, the self-eval and everything like that that's due each year. And another note on special appointment, most often, and with the exception of that rollover year, we have to reapply for the position. I started here as a special appointment, and they opened my position then the following spring, and it was a tenure track, and I had to reapply and was in with a pool of other candidates for that position.
That's helpful, thank
Any
you.
other questions?
I guess I do. I have one more, sir. And this may or not be the right setting, but I'll pose it. I'm going to pose this one towards Lita, actually. You're off the hook. I would, as this discussion unfurls here and we go forward with it and we get a better understanding of the process, I'd like to understand the hiring process itself a little better, Dr. Burns. And so maybe I don't know how we do that, maybe talk offline, but I guess I'm concerned because I've known of individuals that have applied, some multiple times, some that seem to have imminent qualifications for the position that they've applied for. Yet, we're not granted an interview. Position may have even been reposted a second time, applied again, not looked at, but yet no feedback, no understanding, no reason to understand why they were disqualified or what was lacking in their resume or that sort of thing. So I'm just trying to understand that process and the transparency there. And for people to kind of understand that process, because that's another perception that can get out there as how is the hiring process undertaken.
Before you answer that, Lita, let me ask you to answer it in this context. We are here looking at NIC's tenure policies.
Right.
We're not looking at a broad range of hiring policies for a broad range of individuals that may never go into tenure. So if there's an answer to Todd's question with regard to tenure, then, please give it to us. If what he's talking about is a broader range of hiring policies, then that's outside the scope of what we're here for.
Divine it down to a tenure track position that's been posted. The same thing should apply.
We have a practice, excuse me,
No, that's right.
Chairman Howard, Trustee Banducci. We have a hiring practice here at North Idaho College. We do not have a specific policy in place that dictates a procedural step-by-step of how faculty are hired. Now, our practice has been over a number of years at North Idaho College that a committee from the division or from the department is formed. The committee and the chair, or maybe the chair independently, will do an initial screening on applications. They will the committee narrows the applications down to a reasonable number that will be invited to do a teaching demonstration and invited for an on-campus interview. Sometimes that narrowing occurs by a initial either telephone interview, or sometimes it occurs by a IVC or a interactive video conferencing interview. And then candidates are invited to campus. When they're invited to campus, they do an interview and a teaching demonstration. Then, based on all of that information and references and all the other things that go along with good hiring, a candidate is narrowed for selection and offered position. I'm hoping that answers the question.
Thank you. Christy, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a statement. That was a wonderful response to a very specific question, and I guess I just want to caution our board as we move forward with questioning. A specific question's good. A big, long opinion statement that leads to maybe a question, it comes across as a little bit adversarial, and I want to make sure we aren't doing that because, Mr. Chair, you stated very carefully when we started that this was a very respectful process. We're all here to learn about our tenure policies and how we can all understand them to mean the same thing. So I want to be very careful that we're respectful in how we ask questions and it's not opinion-based or adversarial. Thank you.
Judy?
Just thinking about the philosophy of tenure, is there anyone who would come to work here and go through this process and not want to be tenured? Do you have folks that say, I don't want to go through the tenure process? And if so, what does that do to their future? Is that a leader question?
Chairman Howard, Trustee Meyer. Yes, in fact, we have had faculty who have expressed to us that they'd really rather not go through tenure. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting when they do pose that, because that is the system and the process at North Idaho College. I would offer to you that usually a conversation ensues about the meaning of tenure and what it means to the body of faculty at the college. And at the end of those kind of discussions, the faculty member either chooses to continue through the tenure process, or we have had faculty leave prior to receiving tenure because they weren't invested sometimes, I hate to say this, in the work that is required to uphold the role of a tenured faculty member. Not only were they not interested in going through the steps to secure tenure, but they weren't sure they were going to be interested in in continuing to uphold their tenure position.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I think we've concluded. Karen sat down because all her questions have been, she's answered all the questions. And Ron Reed was not able to make it, as I indicated earlier, so we'll skip him and go to Norm Gissel.
Thank you very much. For those of you that don't know, I was a trustee of this wonderful community college. Judy and I served together and ran our campaigns together, and now, as back then, you always get more votes than anybody else. I have a great respect for education. Most of my memorable moments in my life came through in education. I was 7 years at the University of Idaho, 4 as an undergraduate and 3 as a law school candidate, and then 6 years here. And most of what I've done and thought about is how rigorous education should be and how hard it should be and how great and enjoyable an enterprise it is. And it was with those thoughts in mind that I was privileged to be one of the founding members of the Coeur d'Alene Charter Academy. And one of the things that has not been talked about yet is the very idea that a professor of, say, history would use the students that he or she has at any moment in time to proselytize about something other than what it is they're supposed to be there teaching. And I spent, as I said, 7 years at the University of Idaho, 6 years here, and then a period of time at the school, at the charter school. And I calculated all up as to how many professor hours that took, how many lectures that was, that I was somehow involved in. And it was roughly 15,360,000 lectures that professors had the opportunity to go off message. And to my knowledge, there's only one that's done that, and that was Professor Winkler at the University of Idaho in October of that year, and he spent an hour's lecture talking about India's attacking Goa, which is a Portuguese, at that time, was a Portuguese province. And he was upset that Nehru would do that. And it was really the most wonderful moment of my life as a person being educated. But that was the only time in my entire educational career, both in your job and at the Charter Academy and at the University of Idaho, that anybody that I've known has gone off message. So what I've learned from that is that professors, whether they're tenured or not, take these jobs very seriously, and that there's a limited time and there's a lot of knowledge, and that when they're engaged in that capacity, it's a really important enterprise and they stick to it. Another way of looking at this tenure business is to look at it, and I used to do this with Dr. Bennett, was the president during the entire time, a joyous person and a great human being. And every once in a while somebody would complain about Dr. Bennett, and I would ask this question: does he do a good job? Absolutely. Does he run this college the way it's supposed to be run? Absolutely. Is the college meeting its mission? Absolutely. And I says, well, what is your issue? And they didn't have one. They just were upset about something or other. So you can look at this question of tenure as a thing, or you can look at the college and say, is the college broken? Are we not learning history? Are we not learning political science? Are we not learning these other disciplines? Are we putting out nurses that shouldn't be hired as nurses? And the answer to that is, as far as I can tell, and certainly during the time that Judy and I sat here, this college met its goal, its mission. the teachers, all the teachers, but particularly the tenured faculty, they can be analogized to airplanes. I was in the Air Force for 4 years. And I'll tell you that in the Strategic Air Command, I was in the Strategic Air Command in Loring Air Force Base in northern Maine. And if we didn't have pilots, we could have a mission, but we couldn't fulfill that mission because we couldn't get the B-52s off the ground without the pilots. These teachers, and they're wonderful people, and I revere every one of them, are, in fact, the pilots of this educational institution. They are the most important ingredients. You got to have the students, you got to have the administrators, you got to have the trustees, but the vital part of the mission is the teachers. When you have teachers of such a high quality that they're on this tenured track, I mean, you really have remarkably successful and talented people. And the fact that there's only very few of them that are fired for cause or some other reason isn't, to my way of thinking, when I was sitting where you're sitting, that wasn't what was important. What was important was that we had this tremendously high quality group of people that were kind enough and smart enough and talented enough that they wanted to impart their information and use their teaching skills to inform our students. Teachers are very special types of people, and they should be treated in a special way, just like the pilots on those B-52s. They were special people, and your mission is nothing if you don't have the quality of the faculty. So what you have to do is you have to figure out how to get and maintain this quality. And I don't know whether tenure is the best way to do it or not, but I do know that if you don't have tenure, you got to come up with something like tenure. Maybe it has another name, but it's something like tenure, because the other institutions of higher education, if we're not treating these people right, they're going to go after these other educational institutions, and our education's going to suffer. We have to have a high quality of teachers, professors, talented giants in their field to come in here every day and slug it out with these students. And these students walk away from the halls of institution here better people than they thought possible because of the talent and the dedication of these teachers. So we have to figure out a way, as I'm a consumer of education and as a person that pays taxes to this educational institution, I want the best product possible. I want excellence in education, and I want rigor in education. That's what we and Judy and others, Betty McLean and people like that, that's what we wanted, and I think that's what you guys want. And all my life has been this, I've had the same refrain, and we can have, and I'm from the school that all kinds of ideas, no matter how obviously beneficial they are, and I certainly think that tenure is one of those, tenure as practiced in North Idaho College. I think it's really a good idea, but it's not a bad thing to discuss it periodically. So I'm not faulting you from doing that, but I just want you to reflect on how important. There is no college unless there's professors, and there are no professors unless you treat them properly like we treated those wonderful pilots on those B-52s in Loring Air Force Base. So that's really all I have to say. Most of the things that I wanted to say have been said far more ably by these people. And I agree with most of what Mr. Tippett had to say. I think it was Mr. Tippett was the person you read?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if we don't want, if tenure is broken, let's fix it. If it's not broken, let's not fix it. And one of the ways to evaluate that is, are we performing on our mission as an educational institution? And I think we are, and I'm very proud of this institution. I was proud of it when I was here. I'm still proud of it, and I think you guys are doing a fine job, and hopefully this will run its course and we'll get back to educating children.
Thank you. Any questions of Norm? You did stray a little bit from our narrow focus, but it was a very nice talk. Thank you very much.
I'm 73, I can go anywhere I want.
Thank you very much, Norm. All right, that kind of concludes our presentations. There is an opportunity, I was going to offer the opportunity to our president to make a comment with regard to the tenure policy here. And we're going to try and conclude this by 7:30. There's an opportunity for the trustees to have a discussion. But please go ahead with your comments first, and then we'll have a discussion amongst the trustees.
Well, Mr. Chair, trustees, and fellow B-52 pilots out there, I have had the great privilege of working at 2 universities and 3 community colleges, so I probably have as much experience with tenure as anyone here. Now, all of those institutions had a tenure process, yet each was different in criteria, duration, and evaluation systems. And at NIC, the tenure process begins before a faculty member is employed into tenure with the hiring process and selection process. And it would be naive and simplistic to think that the ills of higher education are attributed to tenure, and the myths continue to persist. And so much of the myths have been discussed already, and so I won't revisit that ground, but I will give you my perception of tenure at North Idaho College. At some of the other institutions that I had served at, tenure was a rubber stamp process. At other institutions, there was a lack of integrity in the process. And from what I've seen at North Idaho College, it is the best operating practice that I have experienced. And as Dr. Burns mentioned, the statistics that demonstrate that the process is in fact working. And so one of the operative questions that comes out of all of this is, or it appears to be, well, what if a faculty member is not performing to standards? Then the operative question becomes, who is holding them accountable? Well, the answer should be administrators and students through evaluations. However, I have seen instances where administrators do not understand the criteria for achieving tenure, they do not understand the requirements of due process, or they're just too lazy to follow through with their responsibilities. While tenure requires that due process be followed before faculty can be removed, it also protects exceptionally good faculty from being undermined and removed by ineffectual administrators and blustering politicians. Tenure is not about protecting bad faculty, it's about protecting good faculty. Now, how can anyone object to requiring an administrator at North Idaho College to have a good reason for remediating or firing anyone? Isn't this simply holding the administrator responsible for sound educational judgment? At NIC, hold me accountable for sound educational judgment if you believe the work is not getting done. Don't blame faculty based on perceptions, myths, and rumors. I am a strong advocate of tenure, and not just for academic faculty, but for career and technical faculty alike. And at the other 5 institutions I've served at, career and technical faculty had tenure at those. A faculty member is a faculty member is a faculty member, and we shouldn't discriminate from one to another. President's Cabinet recently and unanimously signed a letter of support endorsing the tenure process as written and implemented at North Idaho College and supporting our tenured faculty. And I would encourage our Board of Trustees to support our processes that have a high level of integrity and accountability, and our faculty as well. And thank you for the opportunity to make a few remarks.
We're now going to take, we've got the next 15 minutes that we can take for the trustees to have some discussion about what we've heard here tonight. And Ron, would you start us out, please?
Ooh, I'd love to. First of all, Mr. Dunlap, I felt a little bit defensive about the fact that we asked some questions. We wanted to have a debate. We wanted to have a discussion. I don't believe debates and discussions in bringing things that are confusing to a whole world, a whole community about this. I don't think there was ever blaming the faculty. So if that's what you got out of this process, then I apologize if I was a part of that. What we wanted to do is get some clarification as what is tenure, how does it fit with this college? We went through a process. And I can tell you just from what we've heard today, it was worth our time and energy, and we don't change anything. But to start saying there was blame towards the faculty, I think that's kind of poisoning the process. So I would caution you that when we ask questions, we ask for some clarification, and we engage the faculty that's been a part of this. This is part of the educational piece so that we can go through, and now we can go to the community and share with them the value of tenure as it fits with the North Idaho College.
Okay. Todd, did you have any comments?
Are you going from right to left? No, I'm just going back. Oh, okay.
Did you have any comments? Okay. Judy?
I'm still thinking and absorbing. Can I have
Christie?
it pass and come back?
Why, sure. Okay. You know, I just wanted to make a general statement that I do appreciate the process. Judy and I have been here the longest of this board, which is hard to believe.
Slow learners, Christie? Are we slow learners? Okay.
And so we've been through policy review. We're very comfortable. I speak for myself, I guess. I'm very comfortable with the tenure process. I'm very proud of the process, and I've always been a strong supporter of it. I think as an institution, we look for best practices that support our mission. And this is one of those best practices. It's ongoing professional development, and we have people in this career field that strive for excellence, and you can't ask for anything better than that. And so it's really important that we celebrate and support that and make sure that everyone feels that level of support from your Board of Trustees. But I do think it's a good, healthy process for discussion. I'm glad it has turned out the way it has, where we're all sharing free exchange of ideas. And I certainly wouldn't want this to impact anyone in a negative way as we move on from here. This is an education process, and so I appreciate the opportunity, Board, for this discussion.
Have you had enough time to come up with anything?
Probably never, but I'll give it a try, just because, as Christie pointed out, I've had the opportunity, and Norm, it's fun to work with you again on these issues. For me today, it was very reaffirming of the things I've felt, but now we can, in a sense, better document that process that I've been aware of over the years, but we lose track of it because we're off to doing other things. And I thank you, Mr. Chair, and board members for bringing this forward and having what I feel is a good, constructive conversation. I think, Ron, you said in the beginning, we wanted to be sure it was not adversarial. We are an educational institution, and so we board members ought to be the first at becoming educated. And this, again, helped me do that. I would hope from here we go forward with more energy and more heart and more faith in the process that's in place. It's working well. I'm proud to have been such a slow learner that I'm still here, and I look forward to working some more with you all. Do we do
10
it?
minutes.
Are we
I got
done?
10
Are we done?
minutes, yeah. I know that this process, this workshop that we planned has had created a great deal of concern amongst the faculty. And that's quite understandable, quite frankly. When you take something as important to an institution as the concept of tenure and say we're going to explore it, imaginations run wild as to, is this the beginning? Is this something that is going to change what we have and what we treasure here? And let me tell you, I think that the process, as everybody else has talked about tonight, even with that concern, the value of us having the opportunity to discuss it publicly And this is being taped, so anybody that wants to hear what went on tonight will have an opportunity to review the tape. But this was an opportunity for this institution to tell the world what tenure is at NIC, not what they think it is someplace else, or what they were told it was, or what they imagined it might be, but what it is here at NIC. And it is not a employment for the rest of your life without being able to dismiss or terminate people. We know from looking at our policies that have been in effect that there can be termination for cause, and cause is defined as any conduct. Now, when you stop and think about this, this is a very, very broad standard, but cause is defined as any conduct that may damage or may be detrimental to the college, its students, faculty, or employees, as determined by the Vice President of Instruction. That is not employment for life. That is a very high standard that everybody has to live to. And we see from the history of this institution that we have a faculty that does live up to those high standards. So the message, I hope, that goes out, not just to all of us, because I think we needed to hear that, and we needed to be able to go through this discussion. I hope that the message goes out to the community at large, that tenure at NIC is defined by essentially some very rigid rules, very rigid responsibilities, and there's constant review of the faculty as to whether or not they're living up to those rules and standards. And you have, and you do. And this is a great institution because of it. And I thank you. And thank you very much for attending this session tonight. We're concluded.